In this movie, I'll show you how to open an image file inside Photoshop just by double-clicking its icon here at the Windows desktop. If you're working on a Mac, I show you how to do the exact same thing from the Macintosh Finder in the very next movie. Now notice that I'm looking at the contents of the O1 Open folder, which is available to those of you who have access to the exercise files. And I'm viewing the images as thumbnails, which you can do by clicking this icon in the bottom right corner of a folder window. Now, initially, it looks like I have 4 files with the exact same name, that is to say, welcome. But they actually have different extensions, which by default under Windows are hidden. However, when you're working with Photoshop and the other Adobe Creative Cloud applications, you definitely want to see your file name extensions. And to make that happen, click on the View tab up here at the top of the folder window, and then turn on this checkbox, File Name Extensions, and that'll go ahead and show us the extensions, which reveal these files to be JPEG, PNG, PSD, and TIFF, which are the 4 major file types that you'll be using when working with Photoshop. Now, I'll be explaining how every one of these file formats work in Chapter 6 when we discuss saving. But for now, just be aware that different file types are often associated with different applications. Now, in my case, I just happen to know that TIFF files are already associated with Photoshop where this specific machine is concerned. And so if I were to double click on this file, it's going to open inside Photoshop as we're seeing here. And the reason I know that this is Photoshop is because I can see the initials PS in the top left corner of the application window. I'm also seeing a menu bar up here at the top of the screen. There's a context-sensitive options bar below it. We have a vertical toolbox over here on the left-hand side, and we've got a handful of panels on the right. And this is all good news because it means that we can use Photoshop's powerful image editing capabilities. But that's not necessarily always going to be the case. And to demonstrate what I mean, I'll go ahead and minimize Photoshop by clicking on this icon in the top right corner of the screen, and then I'll double-click on the JPEG file, at which point I will see it open inside of Microsoft's Photos app. That is in no way, shape, or form what I want because, after all, if I'm working inside Photos, I'm not working inside Photoshop, and I'm not going to have access to all that power. So what you want to do, if you run into this problem, is just go ahead and close Photos or whatever application is opening up on you, and then right-click on the JPEG file in this case, choose Open With, and as opposed to choosing Photoshop from the submenu, which would be a one-off. In other words, you'd open this particular JPEG file in Photoshop, but future JPEG files would once again open inside Photos. Go ahead and choose the last command in the submenu, whatever its name may be. In my case, it's called Choose Another App. And then you want to locate the most recent version of Photoshop in the list. Now, if you see a weird one like this guy right here, which is an artifact of QuickTime, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and choose the most recent version of Photoshop. And then, if this checkbox is available to you, go ahead and turn it on. Again, in my case, it reads, always use this app to open JPEG files, which is what we want. Then click OK, and that is going to open the image inside Photoshop, and it's going to open all future JPEG files in Photoshop as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and minimize Photoshop again so that we can check out this PNG file. And so notice if I double click on it, this time it opens up in yet another utility. It's called Paint. And while it does have a few editing functions, it's nowhere near as powerful as Photoshop. So I'll go ahead and close it, and then I'll right click on that PNG file, choose Open With, choose that final command, locate the most recent version of Photoshop in the list, go ahead and select it, turn on the checkbox, click OK, and that's going to open the PNG file in Photoshop. All right, we have just one more file, and so I'll go ahead and minimize Photoshop. And note this guy right here, welcome.psd. PSD stands for the Photoshop document format, and it's by far the most versatile format you can work with because it saves layers and all the other goodies that you can create inside Photoshop. So just to make sure everything's working the way it should, I'll right-click on that file, choose Open With, and then choose this final command. And in my case, it looks like this file is set to open in an older version of Photoshop CC. That's not what I want. I want the latest and greatest thing. So I'll just go ahead and select the most recent version of the software, turn on the checkbox, and click OK. Now, it's very possible that you're going to see this missing fonts warning, and that's because I'm using a lot of specialty fonts, including Burka, but I also have Avenir, Futura, and Helvetica Neue, and so you may see a much longer list. Now, inside of another program, you would need to resolve these font conflicts, because after all, you generally need the fonts installed on your system that you're using inside the document. But in Photoshop, that's not actually the case. And so I'm just going to click on the Don't Resolve button, and then I'll grab my Zoom tool, which is located toward the bottom of the toolbox over here on the left-hand side of the screen. And then I'll click a few times on the word Photoshop up here at the top of the image until I zoom to 100% as indicated by this title tab up here at the top of the screen. Now, notice my Layers panel, which is located by default in the bottom right corner of the screen. Notice if I scroll up this list to this Photoshop layer right there, it has a yellow warning, and if I hover over it, it's telling me that a font is missing on the system and needs substitution. Well, if this were some other application, that would be true. I would need to substitute that font. But as you're seeing right here, the word Photoshop is beautifully rendered, even though that font is missing. And that's because Photoshop very helpfully includes a pixel-level preview of every text layer that you create. So as long as you don't want to edit the text, you're fine with things just the way they are. And the document will export and print properly as well. And that is how you set things up so that you can open your image files inside Photoshop just by double-clicking on their icons at the Windows desktop.